My mom has the same tattoo. The words left Emily's mouth before she could stop them. And the most dangerous man in the room, 6'2", 240 pounds of leather and scars, went completely, utterly still. Not angry, not threatening, frozen like a man who had just seen something rise from the dead. The entire diner held its breath. If you're new here, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me until the very end. You won't regret it. The night shift at Cactus Road Diner was never supposed to be a dangerous job. Emily Carter had taken it because the rent was due. Her mother was working nights at the hospital, and 18 years old felt like the age when you proved to yourself and everybody else that you could handle whatever life threw at you. She had been handling it fine. For 6 weeks, she had managed the late shift alone. She had dealt with drunk truckers who left bad tips, lonely old men who lingered too long over coffee, college kids driving back from Tucson who treated her like she was invisible. She had learned to smile when she didn't feel like it. She had learned to keep her hands moving, wiping counters, refilling salt shakers, stacking menus, because moving hands meant a moving mind, and a moving mind didn't notice how empty the diner felt at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night when the rain was coming down, like God himself had decided Arizona needed a good washing. She was wiping down the counter for the 4th time in an hour when she first heard it. Not the rain, not the highway, something lower, something deeper, something that started in your chest before it ever reached your ears. The growl of motorcycle engines, not one, not two, but many rolling through the storm like a wall of sound that had its own weight, its own intention. Emily felt it in her teeth before she heard it clearly. She felt it in the soles of her sneakers through the linoleum floor. She looked up. Through the streaked, rain-blurred window of the diner, she saw headlights. 6 sets, enormous, cutting through the dark like something ancient and slow and absolutely certain of where it was going. Then the engines cut. Silence hit harder than the noise had. The couple in booth 3, a middle-aged man and woman who had been quietly arguing over a shared slice of pie, both stopped, talking at exactly the same moment. The old trucker at the counter, Earl, who had been hunched over his coffee for 40 minutes without saying a word to anyone, lifted his head. Even the cook, Danny, who operated the grill, with the philosophy that nothing on God's earth was worth coming out of the kitchen for, went still behind the pass-through window. The door opened. The first one through was Rex Walker, though Emily didn't know his name yet. What she knew in the most immediate and physical way possible was that this man took up space differently than other men did. Not just because of his size, though he was big, broad-shouldered, and solid in a way that suggested he had never once in his life been asked to move and failed to do so. It was something in the way he carried himself, like the room was expected to rearrange itself around him, and the room always did. Behind him came 5 more. One had a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, and he didn't bother to hide it. One was younger, maybe mid-30s, with arms so covered in ink that the skin underneath had become almost a secondary detail. One was older, gray, in his beard, steel in his eyes, moving with the kind of deliberate slowness that didn't mean weakness. It meant he had never once needed to hurry, because nothing had ever gotten away from him. The other 2 flanked the door when they came in, not sitting, just standing like they had assigned themselves a bomb nobody asked them to take. 6 men, 1 diner. The silence that followed their entrance was not the silence of a room at rest. It was the silence of a room is holding its breath. Emily stood behind the counter and did the only thing she knew how to do when she didn't know what else to do. She picked up her order pad. "Welcome in," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "How many menus?" Rex Walker looked at her. It was not a threatening look. It was not warm. It was the look of a man who was accustomed to reading rooms and reading people, and had already finished reading her in the time it took her to speak those 4 words. 6, he said. His voice was low and flat, and it landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Booth or counter?" Emily asked. He almost smiled. Almost. "Booth." "Zwei." They took the large corner booth. Emily brought menus she was reasonably certain none of them were going to read. She set down water glasses without spilling any, which she was privately proud of because her hands were shaking slightly, and she was working very hard to make sure it didn't show. The couple in booth 3 paid their check and left without finishing their pie. Earl the trucker put $3 on the counter, didn't wait for change, and walked out with his collar up against the rain. Danny had retreated entirely from the pass-through window. Emily was alone. She went back to the counter, picked up her cloth, and started wiping it down. She could feel the booth behind her, the way you can feel a fire behind you, not burning you, not threatening you, just present, radiating. She took their orders without writing anything down because she had trained herself to remember 6 black coffees, 2 orders of eggs and toast, 1 burger, 1 bowl of chili, and the older one with the gray beard asked very quietly and very politely if the pie was any good. "Apple's better than the cherry tonight," she told him. "Apple then," he said. And he said it like she had done him a genuine kindness. She brought the food. She refilled the coffee. She did not hover. She had learned that much about reading people, that some groups wanted you nearby, and some wanted you invisible, and this group wanted invisible, so she gave them invisible and kept her station clean and her movements efficient and her eyes forward. That was when she saw it. Rex Walker had his left arm resting on the table, turned slightly outward, and the sleeve of his jacket had ridden up just enough to expose the inside of his forearm. And on that forearm in black ink that had settled into his skin, the way old tattoos do not, sharp-edged and fresh but deep and permanent in a way that means it was never meant to come off, was a design she recognized. She did not immediately understand why she recognized it. Her brain did what brains do when they see something familiar. In an unfamiliar context, it hesitated. It said, wait. It said, look again. Because the design was not a simple thing. It was not a skull or an eagle or an American flag. It was a specific combination of elements, a pattern of lines and a specific symbol at the center that Emily had no name for, but that she had seen in faded and softened form on the inside of her mother's left wrist for as long as she could remember. Her mother had always worn long sleeves. Emily had seen the tattoo only in glimpses, reaching for something on a high shelf, rolling up a sleeve to wash dishes, the rare moment when her guard came down. And whenever Emily had asked about it, even as a small child, even with the simple and innocent curiosity of a kid who just wants to know things, her mother's face would do something complicated and closed, and she would say the same thing every time. It's just something from before. Before what Emily had asked once. Before you, her mother had said. And that had been the end of it. Now Emily stood behind a diner counter in the middle of a rainstorm in the Arizona desert, and the tattoo on the forearm of the most intimidating man she had ever been in a room with was looking back at her like it was trying to tell her something. She told herself she was mistaken. She told herself she was tired, and it was late, and the brain does funny things at 11 o'clock when you have been on your feet since 4 in the afternoon. She refilled coffee. She wiped the counter. She told herself to let it go. She lasted approximately 4 minutes. When she walked back to the booth to check on the table, she was not planning to say anything. She was going to ask if anyone needed a refill, and she was going to look at Rex Walker's arm one more time from a closer distance, and she was going to confirm to herself that she was wrong and imagining things, and then she was going to go back to wiping the counter and surviving the rest of her shift. She asked about refills. 3 men held out their cups. She poured. She looked at the arm. She was not wrong. The symbol at the center of Rex Walker's tattoo, the one that she had no name for and had never seen anywhere except on her mother's wrist, was identical. Not similar, not reminiscent. Identical down to the specific break in the outer ring that looked like it might have been a mistake, but was too deliberate to be one. Her mouth opened before her brain authorized the action. My mom has the same tattoo. 5 words. The kind of 5 words that once they exist in the air of a room cannot be taken back. Rex Walker's head turned toward her slowly. The conversation at the table, which had been a low murmur she couldn't follow, stopped. The younger biker with the ink-covered arms sat up straighter. The older man with the gray beard, who had been the only one eating with any real enthusiasm, set down his fork. What did you say? Rex's voice had not gotten louder. It had gotten quieter. And somehow that was worse. Emily's hand tightened around the coffee pot. I said my mom has the same tattoo. She looked at his arm. That design, the symbol in the middle with the break in the ring, she has it on her wrist. She's had it my whole life. Nobody moved. And Rex Walker, who Emily had assessed in the way you assess dangerous things when you need to know how dangerous they actually are, as a man who was never surprised by anything, looked at her with an expression she could not immediately name because it did not belong on a face like his. He looked shaken, Not angry, not suspicious, shaken, like something had just shifted underneath him and he was working out whether or not the ground was still solid. "Where is your mother right now?" he asked. "Night shift at the hospital," Emily said. "She works nights. She'll be home by 6. Rex looked at the man across from him. Something passed between them. Not words, a look, the kind of look that means a whole conversation is happening in a language other people can't hear. "What's her name?" Rex said. Emily hesitated for exactly 1 second. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Carter. Mauat." If she had imagined the room going still before when the bikers first walked in, when they settled into the booth, when she had spoken those first 5 words, she had not understood yet what still actually meant. This was still. Rex Walker looked like a man who had just been handed news he had spent 15 years convincing himself would never come. The older man with the gray beard, she would later learn his name was Decker, and that he had been riding with Rex for 20 years, and that in 20 years, Decker had seen approximately everything, put both of his hands flat on the table, and looked at them and said nothing. His jaw moved once like he was about to speak and then didn't. The younger one with the inked arms said very quietly, "That's not possible." "I know what I see," said another man, heavy-set, red-bearded, who had not spoken directly to Emily once since they came in. He was looking at Rex, not at Emily. "Rex, we need to talk about this." "I know," Rex said. "Privately," the red-bearded man said. "I know," Rex said again. He looked back at Emily. His face had done something, reassembled itself into something more controlled, but the edges of the shock were still showing, and she could see them clearly because she was 18 years old, and she had grown up watching her mother perform composure over feeling, and she recognized the performance. "Sit down," Rex said. It was not unfriendly. It was also not optional. Emily sat. "This tattoo," he said. "Describe it to me. Exactly, everything you remember about it." Emily opened her mouth and did something she had not done voluntarily in years. She talked about her mother's tattoo. She described the outer ring. She described the break in the ring positioned at exactly 7 o'clock, angled slightly inward. She described the interior symbol, which she had always privately thought looked like a compass rose that had been broken apart and reassembled in a different order. She described the way the lines had softened over time, the way the ink had spread, the way old tattoos do, but the design itself remained precise underneath the softening, like the bones of a thing that time had not been able to change. With every detail she gave, something happened to the faces around that table. Not suspicion, not the narrowed-eye look of people trying to catch her in a lie. Recognition, quiet, grim, profound. When she finished, the table was silent for a long moment. Then Rex said, "How old are you?" 18, Emily said. "How long has she had it?" "My whole life, longer. She never talks about it." "She wouldn't," Rex said, and the way he said it was not cold. It was something closer to grief. "Why?" Emily asked. And then because she was 18 and she had been on her feet for 7 hours and she was running on exhaustion and adrenaline and a stubbornness that her mother said had been her defining characteristic since she was 3 years old. "Who are you? Why does my mother have the same tattoo as you? What does it mean?" Rex looked at her for a long time. "It means," he said slowly, "that your mother did something a long time ago that most people wouldn't have done. Something that cost her. Something she never asked to be thanked for." "What did she do?" Emily asked. But before Rex could answer, before anything could be resolved or explained or made to make sense, Emily's phone lit up on the counter where she'd left it. The screen said Mom. She would not have thought twice about it on any other night. Her mother called when her shift ended, always to say she was heading home and would be back by 6. But when Emily picked up the phone and pressed it to her ear, what she heard was not her mother's normal voice, not the tired but cheerful voice of a woman who had spent 8 hours in a hospital and was ready to be home. What she heard was breathing, ragged, and beneath the breathing, the sound of rain and wind and highway outdoor sounds, the sounds of someone who was not inside where they were supposed to be. And then her mother's voice, barely above a whisper, broken by static and distance. Emily, there's a car. It's been behind me since I pulled over and Static, Mom." Emily was on her feet. She didn't remember standing. "Mom, where are you, Mom?" The line went completely dead. Emily stood in the middle of Cactus Road Diner with a dead phone pressed to her ear and 6 Hell's Angels watching her from a corner booth, and Rex Walker, who had gone very still again, But this time the stillness was different. Purposeful, focused like an engine that has been idling, finally opening up, said, "What happened?" Emily lowered the phone. Her hand was steady now. She didn't know why. Maybe fear, when it gets large enough, becomes a kind of clarity. "Someone is following my mother on the highway," she said. "She called me, and then the line went dead." The booth erupted. Not into chaos. That was the thing she would remember later, turning it over and over in her mind when everything was done, and she had time to think about it clearly. It was not chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was six men moving with the kind of practiced, efficient speed that meant they had done this before, not this exact thing, but something like it, the sudden shift from stillness to action, the immediate collapse of distance between decision and movement. Rex was already on his feet. Decker had his phone out. The red-bearded man was moving toward the door. "Which highway?" Rex asked her. "She works in Maricopa," Emily said. "She would have taken Route 347 North. She always—" "Get your jacket," Rex said. Emily blinked. "What?" "Get your jacket," he said again. "You're coming with us." In the back of her mind, some quiet and sensible part of her brain pointed out that getting on a motorcycle with six Hells Angels in the middle of a rainstorm to chase after a car she hadn't seen was possibly the least safe decision available to her. And the rest of her brain answered her. Mother was on a dark highway alone with a car following her, and the line had gone dead. She grabbed her jacket off the hook behind the counter. She was outside before Danny the cook even made it to the pass-through window to ask what in the hell was going on. The rain hit her like a wall. The engines started all around her, six of them, filling the desert night with a sound like the world being restarted. And Emily Carter, who had thought tonight would just be another quiet shift in a forgettable diner, climbed onto the back of a Harley-Davidson behind the most dangerous man she had ever spoken to and held on. The diner fell away behind them. The highway opened up ahead. And somewhere in the darkness of the Arizona desert, between the rain and the road, and whatever was following her mother's car, something that had been buried for 15 years was about to come up into the light. The coffee cups sat cooling in the corner booth, abandoned. Emily's order pad was still on the counter, and carved into the bottom of Rex Walker's cup, pressed by habit into the diner tabletop, was the faint impression of a ring. A broken ring, angled at 7 o'clock, slightly inward, just like the tattoo. The Harley beneath Emily was nothing like she expected. She had expected chaos. She had expected the kind of reckless speed that looked good in movies and got people killed in real life. What she got instead was controlled fury, six motorcycles moving through the rain like they had been built for exactly this kind of night. Holding formation, the way military vehicles hold formation, Rex at the front and two bikes flanking, and the others spread behind in a shape that was clearly practiced and clearly deliberate. She was sitting behind Rex with her arms around a stranger's waist, and the rain was coming at her sideways, and she was more afraid in this moment than she had ever been in her 18 years of life. Not of the bikers, not anymore, but of what they were riding toward, of the image her mind kept constructing every time she closed her eyes against the wind, her mother's car on a dark highway, a vehicle behind her that wouldn't back off, a phone line that had gone dead in the middle of a sentence. "How far?" Rex's voice cut back through the wind without turning his head. "She works in Maricopa. She would have taken 347 North. She always calls me when she gets off shift. She never doesn't call." Emily stopped because her voice was doing something she didn't want it to do. "How long ago did she get off shift?" "She gets off at 11. It was 11:15 when she called." "That's 15 minutes of road," Rex said. "We'll find her." It was not said gently. It was said with the certainty of a man stating a fact. Emily held tighter and said nothing. Behind her, she could hear Decker, the older man with the gray beard who had eaten the apple pie, talking into a phone pressed against his ear, his voice swallowed almost entirely by the wind. She caught fragments. "Highway 347, North Corridor, female driver mid-40s, broken down or pulled over." And then a name she didn't catch, and then, "Yeah, tell them we're coming." She wanted to ask who he was calling. She wanted to ask 100 things. Instead, she watched the road unfold in Rex's headlight, and she thought about her mother's face. Not the worried face, not the tired face. She thought about the face her mother made sometimes at the kitchen table when she thought Emily wasn't looking. The face she made when something on the news reminded her of something she didn't talk about, when a certain kind of music came on the radio, when the phone rang late at night and she checked the number before answering, and the relief that crossed her features when it was nobody important. Emily had always filed those moments under the general category of adult private life, the things parents kept separate from children because children weren't supposed to carry those weights yet. Now she was riding into a rainstorm behind a Hell's Angel, and she was beginning to understand that some weights don't wait until you're ready. It was Decker who spotted it first. He came up alongside Rex and jerked his chin forward and to the right, and Emily looked and saw what he saw, a car on the shoulder of the road, hazards blinking orange in the rain, and behind it, not on the shoulder but stopped in the right lane with its engine running and its headlights aimed directly at the stopped car, another vehicle. Bigger, a truck, dark-colored. Rex's hand went up and the formation tightened. Emily's grip on Rex's jacket tightened at the same moment. "That's her car," Emily said. She recognized it immediately, the 10-year-old blue Honda with the dented rear bumper and the hospital parking sticker in the lower left corner of the back windshield. "That's my mom's car." "I see it," Rex said. "There are two of them," said the man to Emily's left. The one with the inked arms, whose name she had not yet learned, but who she had begun thinking of as ink, because the mind needs to organize what it perceives, and she was perceiving a great deal very fast. Standing outside the truck, one of them is at her window. Emily didn't think. She started to move some animal instinct to get off the bike and run toward her mother's car, and Rex's arm came back and stopped her. Without gentleness, but also without cruelty, a simple physical fact like a guardrail. "Stay on the bike," he said. "That's my mother." "I know. Stay on the bike until I tell you different." The formation slowed as they approached, spread slightly wider, and Emily watched the two figures outside the dark truck register the sound of approaching motorcycles. They turned, and in the headlights she could see their posture change, the kind of change that happens in a human body when it is reassessing a situation and not liking what the new math adds up to. Rex brought his Harley to a stop 20 feet behind her mother's car and put his feet down and did not cut the engine immediately. He let it idle. He let all 6 of them idle because 6 Harley engines at idle in the Arizona rain is a specific kind of sound that suddenly says something no words need to say. Then he cut the engine. The others cut theirs. The silence was enormous. One of the 2 men, younger, maybe 30, wearing a jacket with a logo Emily couldn't read, took a step forward and then stopped because Decker had stepped off his bike at exactly that moment, and Decker, for all that he was older and quieter than the others, had a presence that occupied space, the way a large predator occupies space without aggression, but with the absolute and uncommunicated certainty that aggression was available if the situation called for it. "Evening," Rex said. His voice was perfectly level, conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. The man in the logo jacket looked at Rex, looked at the 6 bikes, looked at the men who had climbed off them with the unhurried ease of people who have no reason to hurry. He looked at all of this, and Emily watched him run the numbers, and she watched the numbers come up wrong. "We were just checking if she needed help," the man said. "Broken down car, you know, just being good Samaritans." "That right?" Rex said. Not a question. "That's right. Both of you," Rex said. "Good Samaritans, in the middle lane with your truck blocking her in." He tilted his head slightly. "That how you do it around here?" The second man, older, heavier, who had been standing at the driver's side window of her mother's car, moved away from it, slowly, like a man trying to demonstrate that he had never had any particular interest in being there. Emily was already moving toward her mother's car. This time Rex didn't stop her. She got to the driver's side door, and her mother's window was cracked 2 inches, and through those 2 inches she could see her mother's face and the expression on it, the expression of a woman who has been frightened, but has also been all her life extremely experienced at not showing fear to anyone who might use it against her. But at the sight of Emily's face, the composure cracked straight down the middle. "Emily," Sarah Carter's voice was a whisper. "What are you? How did you? Are you hurt?" Emily said. No, I'm not hurt. They were just talking. But the way they were talking, and I couldn't get the car started, something is wrong with the ignition, and my phone kept cutting out." "I know," Emily said. "I know, it's okay. Who are these people?" Her mother was looking past Emily at the bikes, at the men, at Rex, who had not moved from where he stood, but whose presence organized the space around him the way a fixed point organizes a map. Emily opened her mouth to answer and didn't know how to begin, Behind her, she heard Rex say to the man in the logo jacket, "I'm going to tell you once. Get in your truck. Drive the other direction. Don't stop until Phoenix." The man looked like he wanted to say something. He looked like he had rehearsed something, some version of indignation or threat that he had imagined would work in this situation. He looked at Rex. He looked at Decker. He got in the truck. Cheek. The truck's taillights disappeared into the rain in under 30 seconds. Emily stood at her mother's door and listened to those taillights go and felt something in her chest release that she hadn't fully understood was constricted until it let go. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window. "Emily," her mother said from inside. "Emily, who are those men?" "I work with them," Emily said, and then immediately, "That's not true. I don't know them. I don't know them, but they helped me find you." Mom opened the door. The door opened. Her mother stepped out into the rain, and Emily wrapped both arms around her without thinking. And Sarah Carter, who was small and neat and had the posture of a woman who had been carrying things alone for a very long time, held her daughter for a moment with the particular grip of someone who has just been reminded that the things they are most afraid of losing are still there. Then Sarah looked up. And across the space of 20 feet in the rain in the dark, with the hazard lights of the broken-down Honda blinking orange between them, Sarah Carter looked at Rex Walker, and Rex Walker looked at Sarah Carter. And Emily, standing between them with her mother's hand still on her arms, watched something happen that she did not have the vocabulary for, could not have named if asked, but felt with absolute clarity in the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm breaks. Her mother's face went white, not pale, white. The blood left it so completely and so quickly that Emily actually grabbed her arm to steady her because she thought she might fall. "No," Sarah said. The word came out in barely a breath. "No, that's not, you're not." "Sarah," Rex said. Just her name. One word. But the way he said it, the way a man says a name he has been carrying for 15 years without a place to put it, made Emily's mother close her eyes. "How?" Sarah said. "How did you find me?" "We didn't find you," Rex said. "Your daughter found us." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at Emily. Emily had never in her life seen her mother look at her the way she looked at her in that moment, like she was seeing her for the first time and recognizing something she hadn't known was there. "The tattoo," Emily said. "Mom, I saw his tattoo. I recognized it. I didn't know, I didn't understand what it meant. You told him." It was not a question. It was not an accusation. It was a statement delivered in the voice of a woman who is rapidly recalculating the architecture of a secret she has maintained for 18 years. "You told him who I was." "I told him your name," Emily said. "Mom, you were in trouble. You were alone on the highway. There was a car following you. What was I supposed to do? Stand there?" Sarah looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she looked back at Rex. "Is Hawk with you?" she asked. The word landed in the rain between them, and everything changed. Rex's jaw tightened. Decker, who was standing several feet away and had been maintaining the careful distance of a man who understands which conversations require witnesses and which require space, looked down at the wet asphalt. Rex said, "Hawk died 3 years ago." Sarah's hand, which had been resting on Emily's shoulder, closed into a grip. "He was sick for a long time," Rex said. "He made it longer than the doctors thought he would. He always said," Rex stopped, started again. "He always said it was because he had something worth sticking around for, a debt he wanted to make sure was paid." "I didn't want a debt," Sarah said. Her voice had found its footing again. It was quiet and careful and precise in the way her mother's voice got when she was feeling things she had decided not to show. "I never wanted anything from that night. I told him that." "I know you did," Rex said. He knew it too. "That's not why the debt exists." He paused. "It exists because we chose it. Because what you did that night, what it cost you, that's not the kind of thing our people forget." "Your people," Sarah said. And there was something complicated in the way she said it. Not contempt, not admiration, something more textured than either. "Our people," Rex said, and he said it without apology and without performance. Emily was standing between them, listening to this exchange with the feeling of someone who has walked into the middle of a film and is rapidly reverse engineering the plot from the scenes playing out in front of her. Hawk, a debt, that night, what it cost you. "What happened?" Emily said. Neither of them answered immediately. "Mom," Emily turned to face her. "What happened?" Sarah Carter looked at her daughter. Her daughter, who had flagged down 6 Hells Angels in a roadside diner and ridden through a rainstorm on the back of a motorcycle because her phone line went dead, who was standing in the rain at midnight with her jaw set in exactly the way she herself set her jaw when she had decided the conversation was going to happen, whether anyone was ready for it or not. When you were 3 years old, Sarah said slowly, I was driving home from a night shift. Different hospital, different highway, northern Nevada. She paused. I found a man in the road. He had been in a fight, a bad one. He had been left there. She stopped again. There were other men, she said, armed men. They came back while I was trying to help him. They came back looking for him, and Another pause, and in the pause, Emily could hear everything her mother wasn't saying, the weight of what lived in the gap between words. I hid him, in the back of my car, under the seats under blankets. I drove him out through a checkpoint, and I didn't stop until I was clear. And then I drove him to a motel in the next county, and I stayed with him for 2 days until he was stable enough to call someone. And those armed men, Emily said carefully, they didn't find you, They stopped me at the checkpoint, Sarah said. They looked in my car. They didn't look far enough. A pause that carried everything. I've thought about that night every day for 15 years. You never told me, Emily said. You were 3 years old, Sarah said. I'm 18 now. I know. Sarah looked at her. You've been 18 for 6 months, and you've spent that time convincing me you can handle anything. And maybe you can. But this, Emily, I kept this quiet because the people who were looking for Hawk that night, they were not the kind of people you involve your child in. The tattoo was his way of making sure the club would know me if they ever crossed paths. I never thought they would. I never thought. She looked at the diner direction, then back at Rex. A diner in Phoenix. It's a long way from Nevada, Rex agreed. Everything's a long way from Nevada, Sarah said. That was the point. Gone. It was Decker who broke the moment the way Decker seemed to have a talent for knowing when a moment had run its course and something practical needed to happen. He walked up quietly and addressed Sarah in the tone of a man who had long ago learned that practicality is sometimes the most respectful thing you can offer someone. Ma'am, he said, your car, what's wrong with it? Sarah blinked. The shift in register seemed to cost her something like being pulled out of deep water. The ignition, it just stopped. I turned it off when I pulled over, and then it wouldn't start again. Mind if I look at it? Sarah looked at this gray-bearded man who she had met approximately 4 minutes ago and said in a tone that suggested she was too tired and too wrung out to process the absurdity of this particular moment. Go ahead. Decker pulled out a flashlight that he produced from somewhere in his jacket, with the ease of a man who carries flashlights the way other people carry wallets, and went around to the driver's side and leaned in. The youngest biker, Emily, had started thinking of him as Ghost because he moved without sound and appeared at her elbow without warning, materialized beside Decker, and shone his own phone light where Decker directed it without being asked. Rex stayed where he was, and Sarah stayed where she was, and Emily stayed between them, and nobody spoke for a moment. Just the rain and the sound of Decker moving things under the steering column. Bad connection on the starter relay, Decker announced. Happens with these older models. Corrosion. 10-minute fix if I have the right tool. He had the right tool. Emily watched a man who wore a patch that said Hell's Angels on the back of his jacket lie half across the driver's seat of her mother's Honda and repair the starter relay with the same calm competence he had shown when asking about pie. And then she heard Rex say quietly to her mother, Hawk talked about you until the end. Not often, but when he did, he stopped and tried again. He said you looked at him like he was worth saving. Not like he was a problem to solve, not like he was something to be afraid of. He said you just looked at him like he was a person who needed help. Sarah was quiet for a moment. He was, she said. That's all he was, a person who needed help. You know how rare that is, Rex said. Someone who can look at one of us and see that. I was a nurse, Sarah said. That's the job. No, Rex said. The job is treating the wound. What you did was different. The Honda's engine turned over, caught. Decker said, there she is from inside the car with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has put a thing right. Emily exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath for the last 10 minutes until she let it go, and her entire body felt the release of it. She pressed her hand flat against the side of her mother's car, just needing something solid, and looked up at the rain in the dark sky in the place where the highway curved away into nothing she could see. Then she looked at Rex. "The men in the truck," she said. "Who were they?" Rex's expression shifted. "Not much, but enough." "Probably nobody," he said. "Wrong place, wrong time opportunists who saw a woman alone on a dark highway and decided to see what they could get away with." "Probably," Emily repeated. She had grown up with a woman who chose words carefully, and she recognized when probably was doing a lot of work in a sentence. But maybe not probably. Rex looked at her with something new in his expression. Assessment, the recalibration of an estimate. "Your daughter," he said to Sarah without breaking eye contact with Emily. "She doesn't miss much." "No," Sarah said. "She never has." "The men who were after Hawk 15 years ago," Emily said, "are they still around?" The silence that followed was about 2 seconds long. 2 seconds in this context was an answer. "Mom," Emily said, turning to face her, "you've been on a dark highway alone at midnight for 6 weeks because I took a night shift and you didn't want to worry me. Did you know someone was watching you? Did you know there was a possibility that—" "Emily, did you know?" Sarah Carter looked at her daughter, and the composure, the practiced, professional, 15 years maintained composure of a woman who had survived one terrible night alone in the Nevada desert and had been surviving the memory of it every day since faltered. Not all the way, not completely, but enough that Emily saw what was underneath it. Fear, old fear, the kind that has had years to take root. "I wasn't sure," Sarah said. "I hoped I was being paranoid. I thought it had been long enough." "How long is long enough?" Emily said, and her voice came out more raw than she intended. "Mom, how long have you been scared by yourself?" Sarah didn't answer. And Emily turned back to Rex with something shifting in her own chest. Not just fear, not just adrenaline, but something older and deeper that she was only now beginning to understand had been there her whole life without a name. The shapeless sense that her quiet, capable, seemingly unshakable mother was holding the door closed against something that Emily had never been allowed to see. "Tell me," Emily said to Rex, "all of it. I want to know what happened to my mother that night. I want to know who Hawk was. I want to know why there are men on dark highways and why my mother has a tattoo she won't explain and why you looked like you'd seen a ghost when I told you her name." Rex Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah. And Sarah, after a pause that contained 15 years of practiced silence, gave the smallest nod. Rex reached into his jacket. He pulled out something, a photograph worn at the edges. The kind of photograph that has been in a wallet or a pocket for long enough that the image has started to soften. He held it out to Emily. She took it. She looked at it. In the photograph, standing in front of a motorcycle with the Nevada desert behind him and the sun going down orange and gold at his back, was a man she had never seen before. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, laughing at something off camera. On his left forearm angled toward the lens, as though he knew somehow that this was the detail that mattered, a tattoo, a broken ring, at 7 o'clock angled slightly inward. "That's Hawk," Rex said. Emily looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at her mother, and her mother was looking at the photograph with an expression that Emily had no name for, something between grief and gratitude, and the particular kind of sorrow that belongs to people who did a good thing once at great cost and have spent years wondering whether the cost was worth it. "Was it?" Emily asked. Her mother looked at her. "Was what worth it?" Emily said. "Whatever it cost you. Was it worth it?" Sarah looked at the photograph one more time. "Yes," she said, quietly, completely, without hesitation. "Yes, it was." The rain began at last to slow. The rain had slowed to something barely above a mist by the time Decker climbed out of the Honda and said the car would hold. Not forever, the relay was a patch, not a fix, but enough to get home. Enough for tonight. Tonight, Emily was beginning to understand, was going to have to be enough for a lot of things. Sarah hadn't moved from where she was standing. She had her arms crossed over her chest the way she did when she was cold, except Emily knew it wasn't the cold. She had watched her mother make that exact gesture her entire life, in hospital waiting rooms and difficult phone calls, and the moments before she said something she had been rehearsing for a while. It was armor. Functional, familiar, utterly transparent to anyone who had spent 18 years learning to read her. Rex was watching Sarah with the patience of a man who has learned that some people need a moment before they can walk through the door you've just opened for them. Decker moved off to the side and lit a cigarette and looked at the highway and gave the conversation the privacy it was owed. Ghost, the young quiet one, had not moved far from Emily. She noticed this the way you notice things when your nervous system is still running hot. He wasn't watching her with any particular intent. He was just positioned so that he was between her and the road. Instinctively, like a habit. She filed that away. The men who were after Hawk, Emily said, because nobody else was going to start, and the silence was becoming the kind that swallows things whole if you let it. You said probably opportunists. Tell me the rest of it. Rex looked at her, then at Sarah. Does she know the name Varga? Sarah's arms tightened across her chest. Emily looked between them. I don't, should I? Marco Varga ran a distribution network out of Las Vegas 15 years ago, Rex said. His voice had gone flat and deliberate, the voice of a man delivering information rather than telling a story. Hawk ran into Varga's operation in a way that made Varga unhappy. The night your mother found him on that Nevada highway, he had just survived what was supposed to be a permanent solution to that problem. They tried to kill him, Emily said. They succeeded technically, Rex said. He was dead for about 90 seconds before your mother got his heart going again in the back of her car. Emily looked at her mother. Sarah said nothing. She was looking at a point somewhere past Rex's shoulder. Varga's men saw a car stop, Rex continued. They saw someone get out. They came back to the checkpoint to see who it was, and your mother drove through with Hawk under a pile of blankets in her back seat and a completely unremarkable face. I was terrified, Sarah said quietly to that same point past Rex's shoulder. I want you to understand that. I was not brave. I was terrified the entire time. My hands wouldn't stop shaking for 2 days afterward. That's exactly what brave is, Emily said. Sarah looked at her then, a quick, sharp look, like the words had caught her somewhere unguarded. Varga went to prison 4 years after that night, Rex said. Racketeering distribution, 3 counts of attempted murder on federal witnesses. He went away for 25 years. His organization scattered. A pause. He was released 14 months ago. The mist settled on Emily's face and she didn't wipe it away. Early release, she said. Good behavior, Rex said, and the 2 words carried a particular weight. His people have been reestablishing since his release, quietly, methodically. Varga has a long memory and he still carries old business. Hawk, Sarah said. She said it like it cost her something. Hawk is the old business. Hawk is dead, Rex said. Varga knows that. But Varga's man at the checkpoint 15 years ago got a partial plate on your mother's car. They never made anything of it while Varga was inside. But 14 months ago, somebody started running partial plates from Nevada incidents in 2010. He looked at Sarah directly. We found out 6 weeks ago. We've been trying to find you since. Emily went very still. 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks was exactly when she had started the night shift at Cactus Road. 6 weeks was exactly when Sarah had started driving the night highway alone. You've been looking for us, Emily said. For her, Rex said. We didn't know about you until tonight. Why didn't you? Emily started, and then stopped because the answer arrived before the question finished. You didn't know where she was. She moved. She's been moving. She looked at her mother. Mom. Sarah's jaw was tight. How many times, Emily asked, since I was 3 years old, how many times have we moved? 4, Sarah said. 4 cities. I always had a reason. Good reasons. Better schools, better hospitals, better. How many of those reasons were real? The silence was 4 seconds long. Some of them were real, Sarah said. Her voice was even and exhausted. Emily, you had a good childhood. I made sure of that. I know you did. Emily's voice was not angry. It was something more complex, the sound of someone reorganizing a room they thought they knew from the floor up. I know you did. I'm not Mom. I'm not upset with you. I'm trying to understand how long you've been carrying this by yourself. Sarah looked at her daughter and didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Rex said, the men tonight, we don't know for certain they're Varga's people, but the timing isn't nothing, and we're not willing to treat it as coincidence. What does that mean? Emily asked. What happens now? Rex looked at her with the direct, unfiltered attention of someone who has decided she is worth being straight with. It means tonight you don't go home alone. It means tomorrow we have a conversation about what your situation looks like and what we can do about it. And it means, he paused, it means the debt is active. Sarah made a sound, not quite a word. Rex looked at her. I don't want a debt, Sarah said. The words came out with more force than she'd apparently intended because she stopped after them and pressed her lips together. I never wanted that. When Hawk was well enough to talk, the first thing he told me was that the club takes care of its own, and I said I wasn't his own and I didn't want to be. I helped him because it was the right thing to do. I didn't do it to collect anything. I know that, Rex said. That's not what this is. Then what is it? It's a choice we're making, Rex said. Not a transaction. You don't owe us anything, and we're not telling you that you do. We're telling you that we know what you did, and we know what it cost you, and we are choosing of our own will to stand between you and anything that comes from that night. You can argue the semantics of it all you want. It won't change the choice. Sarah looked at him for a long time, and Emily, watching her mother's face in the orange pulse of the hazard lights, saw something happen that she had never seen happen in 18 years. The door that her mother kept closed, the door behind which lived every hard thing she had ever faced alone, cracked open just slightly, just enough, and through that crack came something that looked uncomfortably like relief. Hawk, Sarah said finally, tell me about the end. Was he all right? Rex was quiet for a moment. He was himself, Rex said. Until the last few months, he was himself. He had a good life, better than it might have been. He knew that. He hesitated then. He kept a photograph. Sarah went very still. Of what? Emily asked when her mother didn't. Rex reached back into his jacket, the same motion he'd made for the photograph of Hawk, and produced something different this time. Smaller. An old snapshot, the borders worn down to nothing, the image slightly overexposed in the way that photographs from cheap disposable cameras always are. He held it out to Sarah. Sarah took it. She looked at it. Her face did something complicated and complete and private the way faces do when they are processing something that belongs entirely to them. Then without a word, she turned it so Emily could see. It was a photograph of a car parked outside a motel. An ordinary car, an ordinary motel. But sitting on the hood of the car with a cup of something hot in her hands and her eyes squinting against bright morning light was a woman Emily recognized with the specific and absolute certainty of bone-level knowledge. Her mother, 20 years younger. Looking directly at the camera with an expression of pure startlement, like she hadn't known anyone was taking the picture. He took that the morning he left, Sarah said. Her voice was barely audible. I didn't even know he had a camera. He said you made him coffee, Rex said. He said it was the first time in years that someone had made him coffee without wanting something from him. Sarah laughed. It was a small sound, involuntary, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can decide whether to let it out. She pressed her hand over her mouth immediately after, like she was catching it. But she laughed. And Emily heard it, and something inside her that had been wound very tight since 11:15 that night finally began to ease. It was Decker who changed the temperature again. He materialized out of the mist with the pragmatic timing Emily was beginning to associate with him, and said in the tone of a man stating a logistical fact, "We should move. Standing on a highway at midnight is no good for anybody. Sarah, your house. You got room to sit down and talk properly." Sarah looked at him, this gray-bearded stranger who had fixed her car in the rain. "You want to come to my house? I want to sit somewhere dry and you have a conversation with 18-wheelers going past every 4 minutes," Decker said. "If that's your house, yes." Sarah looked at Rex. Rex looked back at her and said nothing, which Emily was learning was his version of "it's your choice." "All 6 of you," Sarah said. "All 6 of us," Decker said without apology or embellishment. Sarah was quiet for 5 seconds exactly. Emily counted them without meaning to. "There's coffee," Sarah said, "and I think there's pie." "Apple or cherry?" Decker asked. Sarah blinked. "Apple." Decker looked back at the others with the expression of a man whose position has been entirely vindicated. "Apple," he said. "Let's go." The suburban neighborhood where Sarah and Emily Carter lived had not, in the 7 years they had occupied it, given any indication of being the kind of place where 6 Harley-Davidson motorcycles might cruise down the main street at 12:40 in the morning, escorting a 10-year-old Honda home. Porch lights came on. Emily saw curtains move in the Hendersons' front window. She saw old Mr. Paulson across the street actually open his front door and stand in it with his reading glasses on, like he needed to confirm with his own eyes what his ears were reporting. She was riding behind Rex again, And she looked at the neighborhood she had lived in for 7 years and watched it react to her, and she felt something she couldn't quite name. Not embarrassment, not pride. Something stranger, the feeling of two worlds that have always existed simultaneously, suddenly being visible to each other at the same time. The bikes stopped in front of the house. The engines cut one by one. The quiet was profound. Emily climbed off Rex's bike, and her legs were stiff, and her back ached, and she was more exhausted than she had ever been in her life. And she felt more awake than she had ever been in her life. And she stood on the sidewalk in front of the house she had grown up in and watched 6 Hells Angels file through her mother's front door. And she thought, nothing about tonight is something I will ever be able to adequately explain to anyone. Inside the house was what it had always been: small, clean, carefully organized, in the way of a woman who controls the things within her reach, because enough things have been outside of it. Sarah put the coffee on without being asked. It was automatic. A nurse's reflex: when people come to you, you make them comfortable, you give them something warm. You buy yourself the time to think by giving your hands something to do. Rex sat on the couch. He did not look out of place in the way Emily had expected. He looked like a large man on a small couch, which was simply what he was. Decker sat at the kitchen table and put his helmet on the floor with the care of someone setting down something valuable. Ghost stood near the back door, not blocking it, just near it, that same instinctive positioning she had noticed on the highway. The red-bearded man, whose name she had finally learned was Garrett, sat in the armchair across from Rex and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. The other two, she still didn't have names for them, settled near the door. Emily sat on the arm of the couch because there was no room left, and she was not going to sit on the floor. "All right," Sarah said from the kitchen doorway with a coffee cup in each hand and the expression of a woman who has decided that if this is happening, it is going to happen on her terms. "Tell me about Varga," Rex told her. He was thorough and he was direct, and he did not soften the parts that needed softening or sharpen the parts that needed sharpening. He told her about Varga's release. He told her about the plate search. He told her that 2 weeks before tonight, one of their contacts in Nevada had reported that a man matching the description of Varga's former logistics manager had been asking questions about a nurse who had worked in Lander County in 2010. He told her that the inquiry had been made casually enough that it might have been nothing, but in the context of everything else, nothing was not an acceptable read. Sarah listened to all of it without interrupting. She held her coffee cup in both hands and she listened, and her face did not give much away, but her hands were tight on the cup and Emily could see the tendons. When Rex finished, the room was quiet. Then Sarah said, "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing dramatic," Rex said. "Don't change your routine in ways that announce you're scared. Don't go to the highway alone at night. Keep your phone charged and keep this number." He slid a card across the coffee table, plain white, just a number. "On you at all times." "And you," Sarah said, "what do you do?" "We find out whether those men tonight were Vargas," Rex said. "We lean on the question until we get an answer. And while we're finding out," he paused. "We're here." "Here," Sarah repeated. "In the area," Rex said. "Chapters have been based out of Scottsdale for 3 years. We're not going anywhere." Sarah looked at the card on the coffee table for a long moment. Emily watched her look at it, watched the war behind her mother's eyes, the instinct to refuse pulling against something she was perhaps too tired to keep refusing. "Hawk asked me when he left," Sarah said, "if I was afraid of what I'd done, of what it might mean for me." She paused. "I told him I was more afraid of what it would mean for me if I hadn't done it, if I'd driven past." "What would it have meant?" Emily asked. Sarah looked at her daughter. "It would have meant I was someone I didn't want to be," she said simply. The room absorbed that. Then Garrett, the red-bearded man who had barely spoken all night, said, "For what it's worth, ma'am, the person you chose to be that night, she made a difference that went a long way out. Hawk wasn't just one man, he was somebody's brother and somebody's son, and he was a member of our family. What you did for him, it came back around in ways you'll never fully see. But they're real." Sarah looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face. "Thank you," she said. It was quiet and real and entirely without performance. Garrett nodded and looked back at his hands. Emily looked around the room at these 6 men in her mother's living room. Coffee cups balanced on knees and helmets on the floor, crowded and incongruous and absolutely earnest in the way that people are earnest when they are doing something because they mean to and not because it costs them nothing. She looked at her mother standing in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the card on the coffee table, and then she looked at Rex. The photograph, she said, the one of Hawk. You've been carrying that. Yes, Rex said. For how long? Since he died, Rex said. Why, Panaye? Rex was quiet for a moment. Because he made me promise that if I ever found her, I'd give her back the proof that it mattered, that what she did mattered, that it didn't disappear into the desert with him. He looked at Sarah. It didn't. Sarah set down her coffee cup. She picked up the old snapshot, the one of herself on the hood of the car, squinting into the morning sun, with a cup in her hands, and she held it carefully like a thing recovered from a long distance. Emily watched her mother hold that photograph, watched her sit with the proof in her hands that the thing she had done alone and afraid on a dark Nevada highway had traveled 15 years and arrived back to her in a room full of people she hadn't known this morning and would not forget tomorrow. And then Emily's own phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. Arizona area code. One text message. She opened it. 3 words. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked up at Rex. Is your number saved in my phone? She asked. Rex shook his head. Didn't think so, Emily said. She turned the phone around so he could see the screen. The message read, she remembers us. Rex took the phone from her hand. He read the message once. He passed it to Decker without a word. Decker read it. His expression, which had been the studied calm of someone who has seen enough in his life to maintain a baseline composure through most things tightened at the edges. That's not us, Rex said. I know, Emily said. Did you give your number to anyone tonight? The men on the highway. I never got within 10 feet of them, Emily said. They never touched my phone. Rex looked at Decker. Decker looked at Garrett. Ghost, without being asked, was already at the back window. Then someone else has been watching tonight, Rex said. Sarah had stood up from her chair. She was looking at the phone in Rex's hand, and her face had gone through 3 different expressions in the last 5 seconds and arrived at something that Emily could only describe as the face of a woman who has been bracing for something for a very long time and has just heard the first sound of it arriving. Varga, she said. Or his people, Rex said, letting us know they see us. They're telling us they know we found you, Decker said. Not to Emily, to Sarah, which means they were close enough tonight to see it happen. The room temperature changed, not physically, but everyone in it felt it. Ghost turned from the window and said one word to Rex quietly, precisely, car. Parked, Rex asked. Running, Ghost said. Rex stood up, and the shift was instantaneous from a man sitting in someone's living room having coffee to something else entirely, a quality of attention and readiness that Emily felt physically like a change in air pressure before a storm. Emily, Rex said, get your mother away from the windows. Emily was already moving. And outside on the quiet suburban street where porch lights had come back on and Mr. Paulson had finally gone back inside a car sat idling in the dark with its lights off, watching. Emily pulled her mother back from the window with both hands, and Sarah didn't resist, which told Emily more than any words could have her mother, who resisted everything on principle, who had been resisting the weight of this secret for 15 years, through 4 cities and 1,000 careful choices, simply let herself be moved. She let Emily put her back against the interior wall between the kitchen and the hallway, away from the glass, away from whatever was outside, and she stood there and breathed and said nothing. That scared Emily more than the car outside. Rex was already at the front door, not opening it, standing beside it with his hand flat against the frame, listening. Ghost had gone somewhere. Emily hadn't seen him move, hadn't heard him, but he was no longer near the back window, and the back door was not open, and she didn't know where he was, which was either alarming or reassuring, and she couldn't decide which. Garrett was on his phone, speaking in a voice too low to catch. Decker had moved to the side window adjacent to the front door and was looking out through the 2-inch gap where the curtain didn't quite meet the frame. One car, Decker said. Same position. Hasn't moved. How long has it been there? Rex asked. I clocked it when we pulled up, Decker said. It was there when we arrived. I thought it was a neighbor. It's not a neighbor, Rex said. No, Decker said. It's not. Emily looked at her mother. Sarah was looking at the front door with the expression of someone doing very rapid arithmetic in their head, calculating angles, calculating risk, calculating what 15 years of careful living had and hadn't bought her. How many people in the car? Rex asked. Can't tell, Decker said. Windows are dark. Rex's jaw moved. Ghost, he said at normal volume to the apparently empty room. Ghost's voice came from somewhere Emily still couldn't locate. Already on it. She did not ask how. She was learning with some speed that there were operational questions she was not going to get answered, and that the most useful thing she could do with that particular ignorance was accept it and keep her attention on what she could affect. What she could affect was her mother, who was standing against the interior wall with her hands flat at her sides and her eyes on the front door, and who was very clearly in the process of making a decision she hadn't made yet. "Mom," Emily said quietly. "I'm thinking," Sarah said. "Okay." "Stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're calculating how much I can handle," Sarah said without looking at her. "I've been calculating that for 18 years. I'm better at it than you are." Emily closed her mouth. 2 seconds later, Sarah reached out sideways and took Emily's hand. She held it the way she had held it when Emily was small and they were crossing a street or walking through a crowd, not gripping, just present. A point of contact. We are here and we are together and we are going to walk through whatever is on the other side of this. Emily held on. Garrett ended his call. He crossed to Rex and said in a tone pitched for Rex alone but audible to the room, "I reached Domino. He can have 4 guys here in 20 minutes. "Tell him 15, Rex said. Garrett went back to his phone. "Domino," Emily said. "Another chapter," Rex said without looking away from the door. "They're close." "You're calling reinforcements," Emily said. "I'm calling people who live here and know the area," Rex said, "which is different." He paused. "Also, yes." Outside, nothing moved. The car sat. The street was quiet. The neighborhood had gone back to sleep or was pretending to, which amounted to the same thing from inside the house. The mist had thickened again without becoming actual rain, and Emily could hear it faintly against the windows, the sound of weather that couldn't commit. Then her phone buzzed again. She looked at it immediately. Same unknown number. The message was 4 words this time. "Tell him to leave." Emily read it twice, held the phone out to Rex without speaking. Rex read it. His expression didn't change, or rather it changed in a way that was internal, something shifting behind the eyes while the face held steady. "They can see inside the house," Emily said. Rex looked at the window, at the curtain gap. "Or they have a sight line to your phone," he said. "They can see the screen light up. They know you received a message. They're guessing you showed it to me." "That's still too much," Emily said. "They're too close." "Yes," Rex said. He said it simply without dressing it up because she was not someone who needed things dressed up, and he had apparently arrived at this conclusion. Sarah spoke from her position against the wall. Her voice was controlled and deliberate and had the quality of someone who has arrived at the far side of their own fear and found something harder waiting there. "They want you gone," she said to Rex. "They think if you leave they can finish whatever they started on the highway." "I know," Rex said. "Are you going to leave?" Emily asked. Rex looked at her. The look said, "What do you think?" "Right," Emily said. "Here's what's going to happen," Rex said to the room, to Sarah specifically. "We are not leaving. Garrett's people will be here in 15 minutes. Before they arrive, I'm going to need to know everything you can tell me about your routines over the last 6 weeks. Every time you felt watched, every car you noticed more than once, every time something felt wrong, even if you told yourself it wasn't." Sarah nodded. She had moved away from the wall. She sat down at the kitchen table with the composure of a woman who has decided that if there is going to be a conversation, she is going to be seated for it. And she said, 6 weeks ago, I noticed a silver sedan twice on my commute. Different times, same car. I told myself it was nothing. Make and model. Honda Accord older, maybe 2015. Nevada plates. Rex looked at Decker. Decker looked back at him with the expression of a man who is not surprised and is not happy about not being surprised. "What?" Emily said. "One of Varga's men drives a 2014 Accord," Decker said. "Silver. We pulled the registration 3 weeks ago when we started looking." The kitchen went very quiet. Sarah put both palms flat on the table the way Decker had done in the diner booth 2 hours ago. When she said her name and she looked at her hands and breathed once deliberately and said, "They've been watching me for 6 weeks. "Likely longer," Rex said. "We think the watching has been intermittent since Varga's release. More concentrated in the last 6 weeks. Since I started the night shift," Emily said. The understanding arrived fully formed and landed in her chest like a stone. "Since I started working nights and she was on the highway alone, they saw the pattern change. They saw an opportunity." Sarah looked at her daughter. "Emily," she said. "Don't," Emily said. Don't say you're sorry. You didn't know. You couldn't have known they'd use my schedule against you. I should have told you, Sarah said. Her voice had lost its controlled quality just at the edges. I should have said something. When I saw that silver car, I talked myself out of it. I didn't want to scare you. I didn't want to. I have been trying for 18 years to make sure that one night on a Nevada highway did not define your childhood. And I think she stopped. You think you overcorrected? Emily said. I know I overcorrected, Sarah said. Keeping it from you didn't keep you safe. It just kept you uninformed. Those are not the same thing, and I should have known better. The honesty of it landed between them, and neither of them looked away from it. Emily wanted to say something that would make her mother feel less responsible, and she stopped herself because her mother didn't need to feel less responsible. She needed to feel heard, and those were also not the same thing. Okay, Emily said. We know now. We're doing something about it now. That's what matters. Sarah looked at her for a moment with an expression that Emily had never seen her mother direct at her before. Not the proud look, not the worried look, not the tired, fond look of a parent watching a child become something, but something more like the look you give a person you are genuinely grateful to be in the room with. When did you get so calm? Sarah asked. About an hour ago, Emily said. I'll probably fall apart later. Right now, I'm still running on adrenaline. Garrett said from the doorway. 12 minutes. Shame. The next 12 minutes had a texture Emily would not forget. Rex asked questions, and Sarah answered them. And Decker wrote things in a small notebook that appeared from his jacket, and outside the car sat motionless and watchful, and said nothing else through Emily's phone. Ghost returned, materializing again at the edge of the kitchen with the unnerving silence that was clearly just how he moved through the world, and reported to Rex in a murmur that Emily couldn't fully hear, but the words back fence and clear and second vehicle were audible. Second vehicle. There's two of them, Emily said. Back street. Ghost confirmed, looking at her without surprise that she had caught it. Running dark. Nobody in sight, but the engine's warm. Front and back, Rex said. Not alarmed. Analyzing. They were anticipating we'd try to move her out the back. They've done this before, Decker said. Varga's people are organized, Rex said. Buzz. He looked at Sarah. How well do you know your neighbors? Sarah blinked at the shift. Well enough. The Hendersons next door, I've known them 5 years. Mr. Paulson across the street, 7 years. Why? Because in about 8 minutes, this street is going to get louder, and I want to know who's likely to do something unpredictable, Rex said. Louder how? Sarah asked. Rex didn't answer immediately. Then they heard it. The sound came from 3 streets over. At first, a low rolling frequency that built gradually, and Emily recognized it before she could identify it consciously, because her body identified it first. It was the same sound she had heard at the diner, standing behind the counter, feeling it in her teeth before it reached her ears. Multiple engines, not 6 this time, more. Sarah heard it too. She looked at Rex. You called more than 4, she said. Rex said nothing, which was his version of yes. The sound grew. Closer. Emily heard it turn onto their street and felt the base of it through the floor, and then through the chair she was sitting in, and then in her sternum. Headlights swept across the front window. Garrett was already at the front door. He opened it and stepped out, and Rex followed, and Emily stood up without thinking, and Sarah put a hand on her arm, and Emily stopped, but she positioned herself so she could see through the open door. 8 more motorcycles had arrived. They filled the street in a practiced spread, not blocking, not aggressive, just present the way a large and confident thing is simply present without needing to perform the fact of itself. The men who climbed off them were variations on the same theme as the 6 who had come into the diner, but there were 8 of them, and they were local, and they knew this street, and they positioned themselves along it with the ease of people settling into familiar geography. The car at the front of the house, the one that had been sitting dark and watching, started its engine. They're going to run, Decker said. Let them, Rex said. He was standing on the front step, not pursuing it, just watching. The car pulled out, fast. The kind of fast that reveals a decision made in panic rather than plan. It turned at the end of the street without slowing properly, and the tires complained about it loudly in the wet air, and then it was gone. 30 seconds later, from the back of the house, they heard a second engine accelerate away. Ghost appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, clear in the same tone someone might announce that dinner was ready. Emily let out a breath, and then her phone buzzed a third time. She looked at it, steeled for another three-word message, another reminder that someone was watching another move in whatever this game was. It was a different number this time, a number she knew. Maricopa General Hospital, outgoing administrative line. She answered it. Emily Carter. A woman's voice. Professional, cautious. Yes, Emily said. This is Patricia Huang Hospital Administrator. I'm calling because we had an incident report flagged on your mother's ID badge. Someone attempted to access her personnel file from an external terminal approximately 40 minutes ago. It was blocked by our system, but we're required to notify the employee of any attempted breach. Is your mother available? Emily looked across the room at her mother. Yes, she said. She's right here. She held out the phone. Hospital admin, someone tried to access your personnel file tonight. Sarah took the phone. Listen. Her face, which had been gradually finding its way back to something like steadiness over the last hour, went tight again. I understand, Sarah said into the phone. Yes, I'll come in tomorrow. Thank you for calling. She ended the call. She set the phone on the table. They were trying to get my home address from the hospital, she said. Her voice was even and hollow. They didn't get it, but they tried. Which means they don't have it confirmed, Rex said from the doorway. The two cars tonight were surveillance. They knew the general area, but not the specific address. They were following you from the highway to pinpoint it. And we led them right here, Emily said. The realization hit her like cold water. We brought them here, following Mom. We led 6 motorcycles to her house and they followed us. No, Rex said firmly, with the specific firmness of a man correcting a misattribution. They were already surveilling the highway. They would have followed her regardless. The difference is that tonight she wasn't alone. The difference is that tonight we were between her and them before they could finish what they started on the highway. Emily wanted to accept this. She worked at accepting it. She was not entirely there yet. They still know where she lives now, Emily said. Yes, Rex said. So what do we do? Rex stepped back inside. He closed the front door behind him. He looked at Sarah with the direct, undecorated attention he had been giving her all night. You have options, he said. You can stay here, and we maintain a presence on the street until we resolve the Varga question. You can relocate temporarily while we work the problem. Or, he paused. Or what, Sarah said. Or we stop running the defense entirely, Rex said. We find Varga's people, and we have a conversation with them about the cost-benefit analysis of continuing this. The room sat with that for a moment. What does that conversation look like? Sarah asked carefully. Legal, Rex said. Completely legal. We make it very clear through channels that Varga's people will understand that the woman they are looking for is under the protection of the club, that pursuing this is going to cost more than it can possibly gain. Varga is 14 months out of a federal prison. He does not want to go back. We make the math obvious to him. And if the math doesn't persuade him, Sarah said. Varga is a businessman, Rex said, not an idealist. The ambush on Hawk 15 years ago was business, not personal. If we remove the business case, we remove the motivation. You sound very certain, Sarah said. I'm not, Rex said, but it's the highest probability path. Sarah looked at Diem, then at Decker, then at the table, then at Emily. Emily met her mother's eyes and held them, and tried to put into that look everything she had been thinking for the last 2 hours. Every realization, every piece of newly acquired understanding, and specifically the part where she had thought on the back of a motorcycle in the Arizona rain about what it must have cost her mother to drive past that man on the highway and then stop the car and turn around. Sarah had turned around. She always turned around. All right, Sarah said. She said it quietly and completely. Tell me what you need from me. And Rex Walker, who had walked into a diner 2 hours ago with 5 men and a history that had been looking for a place to land for 15 years, reached into his jacket one final time. He put something on the table. It was a patch. Old leather, the edges worn, the colors faded in the way of something that has been kept carefully in the dark for a long time. A Hell's Angels patch, the kind worn on a jacket, but this one had a name embroidered beneath the main insignia. Hawk. He asked me to give you this if I ever found you, Rex said. He said you would know what it meant. Sarah looked at the patch on her kitchen table. For a moment, she was completely still. Then she picked it up in both hands and held it the way you hold something that has traveled a long distance to reach you, and she pressed it flat against her chest, and she closed her eyes and she breathed. Emily watched her mother hold a dead man's patch in her kitchen at 1 in the morning, with 14 Hells Angels on her street and a car somewhere in the dark that had been running from its own mistake, and she understood something she had not understood this morning when she was wiping down the counter of a quiet diner at the beginning of an ordinary night. Her mother was not a woman who had been defined by one night of fear. Her mother was a woman who had been defined by what she had done inside that fear, and those were entirely different things. Emily reached across the table and put her hand over both of her mother's hands, the ones holding Hawk's patch, and held on. Outside on the quiet suburban street, 8 motorcycles and the 6 that had come before them kept watch in the dark. Nobody was getting through that perimeter. Nobody was getting anywhere near this house or this woman or this table where a mother and daughter sat holding a piece of leather that had crossed 15 years and 1,000 miles to come home. But somewhere out there, past the perimeter, past the street, in the larger dark of the city, a man named Varga was recalculating. And in the morning, the real conversation was going to begin. Nobody slept. That was the simple truth of it. Sarah made a second pot of coffee and then a third, and the kitchen table became the kind of place that kitchen tables become in the hours after crisis, covered in cups and phones, and the quiet residue of people who have been through something together and are not yet ready to separate from the shared weight of it. Decker stayed at the table. Garrett stayed near the door. Ghost had gone outside at some point and not come back in, which Emily had stopped questioning, because Ghost operating in undefined locations was apparently just the baseline condition of Ghost. The others cycled, some outside, some in, with a rotation that was clearly habitual and clearly not discussed aloud because it didn't need to be. Rex sat on the couch and made calls, 3 of them back to back, each one short and precise, and conducted in a half voice that carried tone without carrying content. When he finished the third call, he set his phone face down on the cushion beside him and was quiet for a moment. "Varga's logistics man," he said to the room, "the one who drives the silver Accord. His name is Fitch. He's been on parole since March. His parole officer is in Phoenix." "You know his parole officer," Emily said. "We know people who know people," Rex said. "That's different." "Is it?" Rex almost smiled. "Slightly." "What does knowing his parole officer change?" Sarah asked. She was sitting at the table with her coffee Hawk's patch resting on the table in front of her. She hadn't put it down since she'd picked it up. Emily wasn't sure she was aware of this. "Fitch going anywhere near you is a parole violation," Rex said. "Surveillance of a private citizen in the context of a former criminal enterprise is a parole violation. Tonight, the highway, the car outside your house, if we can tie Fitch to either of those events, he goes back inside. And Varga loses his point, man." "Can you tie him to it?" Emily asked. "Ghost took a partial plate on the car that was outside the house," Rex said. "We're running it." "Partially legally," Emily said. "Partially," Rex agreed. Sarah looked up from the patch. There was something different in her expression, now less siege mentality, more calculation. Emily recognized the shift because she had seen it before in her mother, the moment when a nurse stops being afraid for a patient and starts working the problem. "If Fitch goes back inside," Sarah said slowly, "Varga's lost his primary asset on the ground. He's 14 months out of federal prison, and he's already directing surveillance operations in Arizona. His parole conditions have to be strict." "Federal release on his RICO conviction," Rex said. "Extremely strict. If someone made an anonymous report to his federal parole officer," Sarah said, citing specific dates and locations, the highway, the plate, the house, "that would initiate a formal review," Rex said. He was looking at her with focused attention now. "During which Varga would have reason to pull back entirely," Sarah said. "He can't afford federal scrutiny right now. He can't afford to be anywhere near anything that looks like resuming criminal activity. Not 14 months out, not with a 25-year sentence hanging over him as the alternative." She paused. "He's not going to risk going back for an old grudge he's not even certain is the right target. He doesn't know for certain that I'm the woman from the checkpoint. He was running on a partial plate and a county record and a physical description, 15 years old." The room was very quiet. Decker set down his coffee cup. "She's not wrong," he said to Rex. "She's a nurse," Rex said, not dismissively, with genuine recognition. "She assesses risk for a living." "I keep people alive for a living," Sarah said, "which means I also calculate the fastest route to the most stable outcome. And the fastest route here is not confrontation. It's making the cost of continuing too high to justify the potential gain. She looked at Rex directly. You said Varga is a businessman. Then make it bad business. Don't threaten him. Just make the math undeniable. Rex looked at her for a long moment. Hawk said you were smart, he said. Hawk was barely conscious for most of it, Sarah said. He was conscious enough, Rex said. Emily watched this exchange and felt something loosen in her chest, not the fear. The fear was still there, would probably be there for a while, but something around it, the rigid structure she had been holding herself in since 11:15 when the phone line went dead. She picked up her own coffee cup and found it was cold and drank it anyway. I want to be part of this, Emily said. Both of them looked at her. Whatever conversation you're having about anonymous reports and parole violations and making the math undeniable, I want to know what's happening. I want to know the steps. I'm not going back to not knowing. Sarah looked at her for a moment. No, she said, you're not. She said it with the finality of a woman updating a policy she had been operating under for too long. You're not going back to not knowing. Rex nodded once. Then here's what happens next. She added. The plan was methodical and quiet and entirely unglamorous, which was Rex explained the point. Garrett compiled the location data, the highway, the timestamp of the text messages, the partial plate Ghost had captured, and formatted it into a clear, factual, deniable document. Decker contacted someone he referred to only as a friend of ours in federal law enforcement, which Emily understood to mean precisely what it sounded like, and filed away without comment. A formal tip was logged through a federal whistleblower channel at 4:17 in the morning. Anonymous. Verifiable only through the evidence it contained. The kind of tip that doesn't require a source because the facts carry themselves. By 5 a.m., Decker's federal contact had confirmed the tip was received and flagged for priority review. At 5:20, Rex's watch phone rang. He looked at the number, showed it to Decker. Decker's eyebrows moved a fraction of an inch, which Emily had learned was equivalent to anyone else's sharp intake of breath. Rex answered it. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Rex said three things: I'm listening and understood, and that's acceptable. Then he ended the call. He set the phone on the table. He looked at Sarah. That was a message from Varga's attorney, Rex said. The kitchen went absolutely silent. At 5:20 in the morning, Emily said. Varga was awake, Rex said, which means Varga already knew about the tip, which means he has someone inside somewhere who flagged it fast, which also means that he is significantly more alarmed about federal attention than we anticipated. What did his attorney say? Sarah asked. That his client has no interest in pursuing any matters related to Nevada in 2010, Rex said. That any activities in the Phoenix area by individuals associated with his client were unauthorized and have been discontinued. And that his client wishes to, Rex paused on the phrasing like he was making sure he had it exactly right. Quote, express his sincere wish that the matter be considered resolved on all sides. Sarah stared at him. Emily stared at him. He folded, Emily said. He folded in 4 hours. He was never as committed as he appeared, Rex said. The surveillance was about information gathering, not a planned action. He wanted to know if the woman from the checkpoint could identify any of his current operation. He wasn't certain you could. He wasn't certain you even remembered enough to be a threat. When he saw the club show up, the calculus changed immediately. He was never going to fight a federal tip and a club protection simultaneously for an unconfirmed risk. You knew, Sarah said. She wasn't accusing, she was reading him. You knew once the club was visibly present, he'd move to protect his federal status. I expected it, Rex said. I didn't know it. There's a difference. But you planned for it, Sarah said. I planned for the best realistic outcome, Rex said, which is usually the one where nobody gets hurt and nothing escalates beyond the point of retrieval. He paused. Hawk taught me that, actually. Before Hawk, I would have planned differently. The kitchen held that for a moment. Sarah looked at the patch on the table. She touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. He changed things, she said, not a question. He changed a lot of things, Rex said. What happened to him in Nevada, the ambush, the aftermath, it forced a long conversation inside the club about who we were and who we wanted to be, what we were willing to do and what we weren't. Hawk pushed hard for a version of us that he thought was possible. Rex stopped. When he continued, his voice had something different in it, quieter, more personally held. He said a woman had looked at him like he was worth saving. He said he didn't want to be the kind of man who proved her wrong. The silence that followed was not empty. Emily looked at her mother, and her mother's eyes were bright in the way that meant she was not going to cry, but was doing serious work to maintain that position. He didn't, Emily said. Prove her wrong. No, Rex said. He didn't. Oak. Dawn came the way it comes in the Arizona desert, not gradually but decisively, the sky going from black to deep purple to a hard bright gold in what felt like minutes. Like the dark had made a decision and committed to it fully. Emily noticed it through the kitchen window, without meaning to, the light changing on the far wall, and she thought about the fact that she had been awake for 22 hours and felt almost none of it in the way she expected. The body under sufficient adrenaline and sufficient consequence does remarkable things. The men who had been outside began to move. The rotation condensed and then ended, and Emily heard engines start. Not the full formation, sound individual ones measured departures. Domino's chapter the 8, who had arrived as reinforcements, left first. She heard them go without ceremony, no announcement, just the sound of bikes pulling away from the curb and the street settling back into neighborhood quiet. Garrett came in from outside and said the secondary vehicle hadn't returned and the street was clean, and Rex said good, and that was the entirety of that debrief. Ghost appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was genuinely never going to get used to this and put something on the counter. It was a helmet, custom painted white with a design along the side that took Emily a moment to recognize because the light was still coming and she was running on no sleep. When she looked at it clearly, she saw what it was. Wings, white wings, carefully done, not rushed, the kind of detail that required time and intention. That's mine, she said, not a question. Ghost looked at her. He had brown eyes she hadn't had the opportunity to notice before, calm and direct. Rex had it made 3 weeks ago, he said, when we started looking for your mother. He didn't know there'd be a you to give it to, but he figured if Sarah Carter had a family, they'd deserve something too. Emily looked at the helmet. She thought about Rex making that call 3 weeks ago before he knew she existed, hedging against the possibility of a family he hadn't yet found. She thought about what that said about how he thought, what it said about the club, about Hawk, about the chain of cause and effect that runs from a single decision made on a dark Nevada highway to a helmet with white wings sitting on a counter in Phoenix at 6 a.m. Thank you, she said to Ghost, because Rex was outside and Ghost was here. Ghost nodded and stepped back and was gone again. Sarah had seen it. She was looking at the helmet from across the kitchen with an expression Emily felt more than read, the expression of a woman watching the consequences of a choice she made 18 years ago ripple forward into her daughter's hands. Mom, Emily said. I know, Sarah said. That's not what I was going to say. What were you going to say? Emily picked up the helmet, held it. It was lighter than she expected, and the paint was smooth under her hands, and the wings were precise and real and white as anything. I was going to say that I think I understand now why you never told me. Not as an excuse, I understand the actual reason. Sarah waited. You weren't protecting me from fear, Emily said. You were protecting me from having to carry something I hadn't chosen to carry. The same way you chose to carry it without asking anyone to share the weight. She paused. But I'm 18, and I would have chosen to carry it. If you'd asked, I would have. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I know, she said finally. I know you would have. That was also part of it. Emily looked at her. You didn't want to need me, Emily said. You were my child, Sarah said. Children shouldn't have to be strong for their parents. I'm not a child anymore, Emily said, and you're not alone anymore. Those are both true at the same time, and you're going to have to let both of them be true. Sarah looked at her daughter, this 18-year-old, who had flagged down 6 Hells Angels and ridden through a rainstorm, and sat in her kitchen until dawn working the problem with men she hadn't known existed 6 hours ago, and the last of the 15-year-old wall came down. Not in pieces, all at once. The way things come down when they've been standing past their time. She crossed the kitchen and held her daughter, and Emily held her back, the helmet still in one hand, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Rex came in from outside. He stopped when he saw them. He stayed very still in the doorway for a moment with the natural respect of a man who recognizes a moment that belongs to someone else. Then he moved quietly to the counter and poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the far wall and looked at the ceiling and gave them the room. When they separated, Sarah wiped her face with both hands in the brisk, unsentimental way of a woman who allows herself exactly the emotion required and then gets back to business. She looked at Rex. "What now?" she said. "Now you go to work," Rex said. "When your shift ends, you drive home the same way you always drive home. You call your daughter when you leave. Nothing changes visibly." Varga's attorney said discontinued and resolved. "We take that at face value while we verify it. If it holds, and I believe it will hold, then in 3 or 4 weeks, this goes back to being a quiet life." "And if it doesn't hold," Sarah said. "Then you have our number," Rex said, "and we are 40 minutes away on a clear night." Sarah nodded. Rex straightened. He put his coffee cup in the sink with a care that was oddly domestic. He looked at Emily. "Your mother saved a man's life," he said. "She did it alone, and she didn't ask for anything, and she has been living with the consequences of that choice for 15 years. He let that sit for a second. "The world is better than it was on the night she made that choice. In ways she can see, in ways she'll never know. That matters. It accumulated." He paused. "I wanted her to know that before we left." Emily nodded. Her throat was doing something inconvenient, so she didn't trust words. Rex put on his jacket. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, the same position he had been in hours ago, on the other side of this night, standing beside the diner door in the rain, a different version of this exact moment. He looked back at Sarah. "He was grateful," Rex said. "Every day, he was grateful." Sarah pressed her lips together, held his gaze. "Tell me something," she said. "In all those years, was he happy?" Rex thought about this with genuine care, the kind of care that doesn't rush to the comfortable answer. "He had hard years," Rex said, "and he had good years. And at the end, when he knew the end was coming, he said the thing he was most certain of was that his life had meant something, because someone had decided it was worth saving." He paused one last time. "That was you. That certainty was you." He walked out. The engines started, 5 of them, and Emily moved to stand beside her mother at the kitchen window. They watched the bikes pull away from the curb one by one, moving down the quiet street in the early morning light, the sound of them filling the neighborhood one last time before it faded, turned at the corner, and was gone. The street went still. Mr. Paulson's porch light was on. The Henderson sprinklers had started up. An ordinary morning was assembling itself with complete indifference to everything that had happened inside it. Emily set the helmet on the counter beside her. She looked at the wings she would carry forward from this night, not just the painted ones, but the real ones, the knowledge of what her mother had done, the understanding of what a single choice made in fear and decency can build across 15 years, how far it reaches, how many people it touches, how it comes back. Sarah put the coffee on for the 4th time, because that is what you do. You make the coffee, you go to work, you drive home the same way you always drive home. And you carry what you carry not as a burden, not anymore, but as the evidence of who you are and who you chose to be when it mattered. On the table, Hawk's Patch lay in the morning light, faded and real and permanent. Emily picked it up and held it out to her mother. Sarah took it without hesitation this time. She held it flat in her palm and looked at it the way you look at something you are deciding to keep. Then she folded it once carefully and put it in her pocket. And Sarah Carter, who had turned her car around on a dark Nevada highway 18 years ago, who had driven through a checkpoint with her hands shaking and her heart going, and a dying man hidden under blankets in the back seat who had spent 15 years carrying that night alone and building a good life inside it anyway, picked up her coffee and her keys and went to get ready for work. She was not afraid. She was never going to be only afraid again. Some debts are paid in money, some in time, some in the specific and irreducible currency of showing up when the road is dark and the cost is real, and nobody would blame you for driving past. Sarah Carter had paid in that currency once, and the interest on that investment had just come home.